subsidiaries of international banks, as they felt that the latter had better access to FX resources, and it's gravely impacting the interbank market, a trend that was threatening a systemic collapse of the financial system and placing tremendous pressure on RBZ and the country at large. I don't want to go into too much details about AfTrades because I've just learned that the next speaker is going to go into more detail about that. But suffices to say that these structures were a resounding success, and the seeds of many more innovative products like the infamous tobacco relays facility, the gold-backed syndicated facility, and many more, as some of them are mentioned here, all designed to tackle specific problems facing the country. These highly innovative products took long hours to design and required much research and sleepless nights to craft, document, and roll out, since they involved initial design, preparation of a concept note, preparation of a credit study, refining and retuning the structure, preparing the operational guidelines, drafting and agreeing legal documentation, and finally rolling out the product. I had actually asked two of my old clients to do some testimonials because I didn't want to be perceived as somebody who is biased towards the organization, but I don't want to, I'm running out of time, so I'll not read them to you. But I got testimonials from two of our old clients basically testifying to the impact that Afreximbank has had on their organizations. I honestly think that what distinguishes Afreximbank from other typical development finance institutions is that it does not see itself simply as a lender and stop at that. When designing its interventions with a view to support the continent's development and structural transformation through trade promotion, the bank tries to address the whole ecosystem surrounding the problems such that it eradicates it in totality. This is evident with products like PAPS and MANSA and many more, all aimed at facilitating the trade, not just financing it. But as I mentioned in many of my previous presentations, what do you expect from an institution whose only focus and ecosystem is designed to serve Africa with Africans from African resources? An institution that was fortunate to have been led by the indefatigable Africans, starting with the pioneer president, Mr. Christopher Dordo, followed by Mr. Jean-Louis Ekra, through to Professor Benedict Oramah, and which I'm sure will continue with the leadership now going into the hands of my African conscience, Dr. George Elombi. While the ingenuity, effort, and sheer zeal in designing these products and rolling them out was and remains the joint effort of the staff of the bank, there is no doubt that the mastermind and main driver behind them is our African giant and unparalleled visionary, Professor Benedict Oramah. I actually was quoting the mantra that Gerald just said about if it is possible, it will be done. If it is impossible, it can be done. But I'll add to that also that in his investiture speech, he said that there is no obstacle too great for a person of will to overcome. His fingerprints are all over the numerous innovative and hugely impactful products developed by the bank over the years. Prime amongst them are the pandemic trade impact facility, PATINFA, which we'll also hear about, which helped basically bring in the scarce yet essential vaccines during the corona pandemic. The Contour, Cotralf, and Sendep, many of those transactions, I think some of them you'll hear about. Apart from his many achievements in growing the bank exponentially, as we saw during his term, I think his legacy will stand out most in the visibility and relevance he brought to this institution, both within and outside the continent. I would never try to emulate him because he's just in a league of his own. But for me personally, Professor has been an inspiration that I'll always look up to. You would agree with me that Prof is a one-man army who fought viciously over the span of his career to eradicate Africa's poverty using trade as his lethal weapon. I hope that even after you leave your post, Prof, you will continue your selfless contribution to the bank you helped build and the continent you gave your life to. As to our new president, Dr. George Elombi, my friend, I am sure you will continue the path of your predecessors and take the bank to new highs. I wish you the best of luck in your new role. Thank you all for listening, and God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amra. Now, the next presentation has probably the most exciting title, Moving In When Others Flee. And it tells the story of Zimbabwe Afreximbank's great support for this nation. So please welcome Jethro Chitereka, who is the former senior manager at Afreximbank and now the head of credit risk at Crown Agents Bank.
Many thanks, and like my predecessors, all protocols observed. It has been said that great men bring out greatness in others, that by their vision, they turn obstacles into opportunities and challenges into triumphs. And in the end, they leave behind in others a conviction and a passion for success. Today, we celebrate a great man, and we're celebrating decades of impact. We're celebrating how Professor Oramah and his team's collective efforts have built a foundation for a prosperous future, not just for Africa, but beyond. So this conference looks at how President Oramah transformed the African financing landscape. I had the privilege of working with Dr. Oramah for 7 years, and in those 7 years, there are so many initiatives that I was involved in. But today, I'll focus on one particular interventionist program, which was the Afreximbank trade-backed securities, or AFTRADES, and how it addressed systemic financial challenges that had impacted Zimbabwe in the early 2010s. Importantly, I also speak on the crucial role that Professor Oramah played. So I'll start with the context. So the year is 2013, 2014. As many of us will remember, Zimbabwe faced a severe liquidity crisis. International banks were not willing to participate in the interbank market. You all understand, those who are familiar with financial institutions, banks lent to each other overnight to shore up liquidity. But the international banks who were solvent were reluctant, and this was because of the perceived credit issues, credit risk and counterpart risk issues that the other banks, the local banks faced, mostly the indigenous banks. And the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe was not in a position to be a lender of last resort as in normal functioning economies. So AFTRADES emerged as a lifeline, restoring trusts, unlocking liquidity, and reviving the interbank market. So how did we conceive AFTRADES? So this was conceived as an interventionist program, particularly targeted at alleviating the liquidity crisis. So it was convinced under the leadership of Professor Oramah, who recognized the systemic challenges that the liquidity crisis was bringing to the country. So amongst us, we prepared a concept paper, and many of my colleagues will recall the late nights, the weekend sessions that we had, when we had several brainstorming sessions to consider the final details. And what came of that was a structure, a collateral swap mechanism, where Afreximbank issued trade-backed securities to solvent banks in exchange for eligible collateral. So how did this tackle the crisis in Zimbabwe? So there were creative solutions. First of all, the issue was liquidity. So the bank's program came in with some credit enhancements. Securities that were traded carried Afreximbank's rating, and they also benefited from Afreximbank's creditor status. The second one was the revival of the interbank market. So banks could now lend to each other using the AFTRADE instruments as collateral. And by its flexible design, it allowed the interbank market to thrive. And these securities could actually be traded as third-party sales. To top it up, the Zimbabwean government provided a guarantee which acted as a confidence booster in the economy. So allow me to speak on the leadership role that President Oramah played. He was very instrumental in this program, and he had a hands-on approach, not just in his vision, but in execution. We've heard many accolades about how President Oramah made things happen. And indeed, he showed up in this crucial time for us. His leadership was crucial. He really foresaw the need for an African solution, and he led discussions and negotiations personally. I recall going with him on a mission and meeting the officials in Zimbabwe. What came out of that? Afreximbank committed $100 million, reinforcing its role as an all-weather friend to African economies in distress. Leadership truly exemplifies Afreximbank's commitment to African resilience. And as many of you will agree, Professor Oramah is a champion of financial sovereignty. So what were the tangible outcomes? So as I mentioned, the issue was liquidity. So there was liquidity injection, which managed to revive the interbank market. Lending amongst banks began, and this improved cash flows. There was also increase in bank confidence. Sovereign banks, which were mostly international banks, could now access funds without concerns about any counterparty risk because of the securities that the instruments provided. Thirdly, there was also economic stabilization in the country. The program helped support critical sectors in Zimbabwe that included agriculture, manufacturing, trade finance, telecoms, and other sectors. There was also policy synergy. Many of you will recall that the Zimbabwean government was trying to stabilize the economy. So this product, or this program, helped to stabilize alongside the government's efforts. And notably, during this period, Zimbabwean, the GDP per capita in Zimbabwe rose significantly after the launch of the program in 2014, peak in 2017, I believe, was the highest in the country's history. So as I conclude, allow me to make a statement that AFTRADE is a testament to innovative finance, regional solidarity, and leadership under pressure. It set a precedent for collateralized liquidity support in Africa. And I'll provide you with a quote, I'll leave you with a quote where President Jean-Louis Ekra, who was president at the time, at the program launch in Harare, he said, and I quote, "AFTRADE was not just a facility, it was a vote of confidence in Zimbabwe's resilience." I thank you for your attention, and I hope this story inspires innovative collaboration in Africa's finance.
Thank you very much, Jethro. Now, COVID, conflicts in Ukraine, in Gaza, there have been so many shocks to the system, supply chain shocks, there have been currency shocks, there have been economic shocks, there have been health shocks. African countries are not alone in facing unprecedented challenges in the past decade. But, Prof, under your guidance, Afreximbank has been there to help countries adjust to these stark realities. So we're going to get some quick presentations now about helping countries adjust. And the first one comes to you via video, so please turn your attention to the screen for a presentation by the CEO of Africa24, Dr. Robert Ochola.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Ochola. I am currently the CEO of Africa24. But before, I spent 7 years as the Director Strategy and Innovation at Afreximbank, working under His Excellency President Oramah. So I apologize for not being there today, but I'm quite excited that I've been given this singular honor on such an auspicious occasion to be part of this legacy conference and indeed the presidential investiture. Allow me to start my conversation today by just sharing what I believe has been a decade of transformation. A decade indeed where the bank served as a financial lifeline to Africa. At a personal level, I spent 7 transformative years working under one of the most visionary leaders on the continent. His Excellency Professor Oramah was very transformative, and he believed in Africa rising. A leader who indeed impacted, not just focused on numbers and reach, but he indeed was the very soul of Africa's economic renaissance. Allow me to take you back to 2015 when I joined the bank. And when you look at the continent at the time, I call it the crucible of crisis, reminiscent of the lost decade of the 1980s, as President Oramah would put it. What was happening at the time? I remember this vividly. Commodity collapse, commodity price collapses. Global demand for African commodities plummeted. Significant liquidity crisis. Indeed, some countries such as Sierra Leone were left with only 2 trade finance lines. And credit lines evaporated across the continent. Allow me to pivot. And I did an experiment, because one of the things we hear about today is AI, ChatGPT, etc. So I asked my ChatGPT that if you were
the president of Afreximbank in 2015 during this crisis, what would you have done? Its answer
was quite interesting. Take 9 months to design a program that would be focused on local currency program, rapid forex and liquidity backstops. Logical indeed, but would not be sufficient to deal with the crisis that we faced at the time. And therefore, to me, President Oramah is our living AI, but with a crucial difference. Not just providing answers in a couple of minutes or hours, and he'd sit and dictate significant solutions at the top of his head, but also delivering a vision, courage, and the urgency that Africa desperately needed, not just at that time, but continuously through his presidency. Unlike ChatGPT, we didn't have 9 months. We barely had 9 weeks. I attended my first board meeting in December in Seychelles of 2015. So President actually gave us just 1 month to forge Africa's financial future. And we did this through the birth of what we dub now the Counter-Cyclical Trade Liquidity Facility, or COLTRAF in short. It was introduced by Afreximbank to avail foreign currency liquidity to central banks, eligible commercial banks, supported or recommended by central banks to enable them honor very urgent trade obligations. This facility benefited, and I believe is the epitome of the foundation in terms of innovation that was created during President Oramah's time. And I think we've learned a lot since then, and you've seen the bank grow its balance sheet significantly from about $6 billion when I was there to, I believe, over 30 billion today. I did learn critical leadership lessons. And I like to say the mind once expanded shall never return to its original dimension. And that continues to keep me going. And I believe this is the focus that Africa, or some of the benefits that Africa has had from President Oramah's leadership. It was about courageous action, acting with boldness. It was about delivering creative solutions in an orderly but also quick and transparent manner, but also ensuring that institutional purpose was delivered at all the time. I call it Africa's second emancipation. And Prof, His Excellency President Oramah would always remind us that if the freedom fighters who fought for our liberation of Africa from a political perspective, took a day off, then the continent would not be where we are today. So the second emancipation is about economic transformation. And President Oramah epitomizes that vision. He expanded our minds to the art of the possible. He showed us that Africa must always come first. So this weekend, as we bid President Oramah asante, or thank you, and also come in with the new president through the investiture, I believe Africa is on solid foundations for growth. God bless you, Professor, President Oramah. God bless Africa. Thank you very much.
I remember working with Robert fondly. Now, next is a presentation on innovative facilities to alleviate the effects of the pandemic on countries. And this one is by Gwen Mwaba. Gwen is Afreximbank's Managing Director, Trade Finance and Correspondent Banking. Give her a round of applause, please.
Well, good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gwen Mwaba, as introduced, and my presentation today, if I can get the clicker to work. My name is Gwen Mwaba, as introduced, and my presentation today, if I can get the clicker to work. That's good. Thank you very much. Apologies about that. So my presentation today is about how Afreximbank redefined Africa's economic resilience. It's about leadership in crisis and the legacy of Professor Benedict Oramah, who led the innovation of the pandemic. Very much. Apologies about that. So my presentation today is about how Afreximbank redefined Africa's economic resilience. It's about leadership in crisis and the legacy of Professor Benedict Oramah, who led the innovation of the Patinfa program. Professor Oramah foresaw the need for African-led crisis response mechanisms. His guiding philosophy has always been African problems require African design solutions. He led the design and deployment of Patinfa to protect trade and also save lives. You will all remember the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, which triggered health, trade, and economic crisis of unprecedented scale. African nations faced severe supply chain blockages and disruptions, and under Professor Oramah's leadership, Afreximbank responded decisively to preserve trade and save lives. The Pandemic Trade Impact Mitigation Facility, or Patinfa, was launched in 2020 as a $3 billion facility and program on a net basis. The purpose was to help African countries to withstand the health, economic, and trade shocks that the globe was facing. Three primary purposes for the facility. One was to support liquidity, to stabilize trade on the African continent, to enable procurement of medical therapeutics and equipment, and also to finance industry. So when we look at the liquidity support, this basically ensured that governments and businesses were able to maintain their ability to import goods and services into Africa. However, if you remember at the onset of COVID, there was a massive shortage of all PPE, masks, gloves. We couldn't get ventilators. So Afreximbank, under Professor Oramah, supported very heavily the creation of the Africa Medical Supplies Platform. This is a digital platform which basically enabled African countries to make orders, and then the digital platform aggregated these orders so that we could be able to import on an aggregated or pooled procurement basis from mainly China. However, there were long queues, and whilst we were waiting for these imports to come through, PATINFA was also used to help fund factories to retool their factories. We had factories that were previously producing garments. These factories were turned into producing cloth face masks. We had in industries that were, for example, in the distillery industry, who were retooled through our financing to start producing hand sanitizer. And this then enabled us to get the imported shipments that had been coming in under the program. Before the onset or availability of COVID-19 vaccines, Afreximbank had already disbursed close to $10 billion under the PATINFA program. About 79% of this funding and liquidity went to financial institutions, and about 17% went to large corporates, and around 4% went to sovereign states. Then came the COVID-19 vaccines, which was a game changer for Afreximbank, the PATINFA story. If you look at this map, you'll note that Africa is dotted in red. And what that represents is the fact that it took nearly 2 years after the first COVID-19 vaccine was administered in the arm of somebody in the West for Africa to receive vaccines. This was a very stark situation, which led to the creation of the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, of which Professor Oramah was one of the key principals. There were 3 objectives that the AVAT task team were tasked with. One was to secure enough safe and efficacious vaccine doses to vaccinate at least 60% of the African population, which would give us herd immunity as guided by the Africa CDC. The second key objective was to estimate the funding needs to be able to procure these vaccines. And lastly, the objective was to create financing mechanisms that would enable the African Union and Caribbean community member states to pay for these vaccines once they became available. So under Professor Oramah, Afreximbank quickly obtained approval for a $2 billion financing package for the procurement of vaccines. And then once again, leaning on the pooled procurement mechanism that had been quite a success under the Africa Medical Supplies platform, we were able to get pre-orders from African and Caribbean community countries to estimate the level of demand, aggregated this demand, and estimated that we would probably need to procure around 220 million vaccines in order to reach that herd immunity level. Consequently, we contracted firmly 41 African countries and countries in the Caribbean community who, like Africa, had also been left behind. But one key important point to mention is that arising from this COVID-19 procurement initiative, we created the first ever AVAT no-fault compensation scheme, which is a fund which ensures that should somebody, God forbid, suffer injury from taking the vaccine or even death, they or their family would be adequately compensated. So again, another first for Africa. This is a really defining slide and moment in Africa's health sovereignty. This was the night that the contract was signed between Johnson & Johnson, Afreximbank, and the Africa Acquisition Task Team. You can see Professor Oramah in the top left. This was immediately after the 3 signatures were penned. It was close to midnight. We couldn't meet physically, so it was all done virtually. So in closing my presentation, Professor Oramah's leadership has transformed Afreximbank into a pillar of continental stability. He's inspired confidence in Africa's ability to respond, recover, and rise. Professor Oramah's legacy is not only about the policies he has shaped, but it's been about the lives that he's touched, both within the organization and outside. Through innovation and unity, Africa can chart its own destiny. Thank you, Professor Oramah, for your vision and for your courage. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, before I exit the stage, I'd just like to introduce a very short video, which is an extract from a 3-part docuseries that is under production, which will give you some highlights about the work that Professor Oramah and others did during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much.
In the past 2 weeks, the number of cases of COVID-19 outside China has increased 13-fold. And the number of affected countries has tripled.
Or the modeling suggested that millions of Africans would die. But I said that will only happen if the continent did not fight.
I was worried because of the extreme nationalism that immediately set in.
But here are Europeans, rich, powerful countries, unable to go to the assistance of another European country next door. And they had the resources. They just didn't have the will.
It was then critical that we begin to think about, again, homegrown solutions.
Afreximbank had prepared itself to be a crisis response institution. If we didn't intervene, countries would start defaulting on trade debt payments. Economy had to operate. Countries have to be able to honor their obligations. Our board immediately approved the Pandemic Trade Impact Mitigation Facility.
We had to mobilize the continent.
We started meeting every evening, trying to get a sense of what needed to be done.
People started talking about trade as a national security issue. The quest of trade went through the roof.
There was a shortage of PPEs in the world. It was the beginning of the supply chain crisis.
We needed to talk direct to manufacturers, and manufacturers needed to see the size of our market. Let's create a bulk purchasing platform, a kind of mini Amazon.
And that was how AMSP, Africa Medical Supplies Platform, was born.
These suppliers would come at us and they would say, listen, I've got 10 million masks. You've got 24 hours to buy them. And I'd call the bank, and the bank would make the payment.
So we had companies borrow to retool or repurpose their factories so that they could manufacture face masks, gloves on the African continent.
That was the first attempt and success also in food procurement for Africa. It never happened before. It was difficult. There was no textbook, nothing to tell us what to do.
The 6th region of Africa, which is the Caribbean, got to hear what we were doing. And that, to me, was the real effective integration of our continent.
Within a matter of weeks, we were effectively on the pooled procurement platform. The relationship between CARICOM and AUs deepened and strengthened.
Late yesterday, the FDA authorized for emergency use the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine.
The vaccines are now on the doorstep, but it's not looking like we can get our hands on it.
If vaccines do not get to Africa in a timely fashion, it will constitute a moral catastrophe.
As early as May 2020, we started pushing for Africa to find its own path.
There was a promise that when vaccines came, they would be distributed equitably.
We have collectively pledged 7.4 billion euros.
They just pledged. We have to see the money.
As the architect of the largest and most complex global vaccine rollout in history.
Even though there had been the promise, somebody forgot to fund the facility.
The Nigerian finance minister, she says, we're here. Did we tell you we have no money? You think we're just going to die?
With that money now, we were then able to earn a seat at the table because no vaccine manufacturer could talk to you unless you show them the color of the money.
We have the money, but we can't get the vaccines. Western countries bought enough vaccines for 9 times its population size because they don't know which one's going to work. They'd over-ordered all of them.
That was apartheid manifesting itself in the ugliest manner.
But the good news was a company in South Africa, they're making the vaccines.
The European Union are claiming that product that is produced at Aspen is stock for Europe because Europe has supplied the drug substance.
I phoned the president of the European Union. I said, Eshela, I will block the export. African people's lives are just as important.
That then set the stage for the deliveries, the first of which went to Togo.
COVID was a real story of Africa's emancipation. It was essentially left for Africa to cater for its own citizens. And that's what we did.
A lot of that is attributed to the leadership structure, the commitment, the community engagement, the all hands on deck approach that Africa took.
Were we not armed by Pan-Africanism, it would have been a total disaster.
We had the opportunity to restore the dignity of the African. Now, there will be no challenge too much for us as a people to deal with by ourselves.
Amazing, amazing. I mean, the length and breadth of Afreximbank's, what it's touched and transformed, is unparalleled. It's truly phenomenal. Now we're going to talk about something called UCAPFA, and that is Afreximbank's way of helping African countries handle the ripple effects of the Ukraine war. Now, the conflict drove up the prices of essentials like food, like grain, like fuel, and like fertilizer, which hit many African countries very hard. So Afreximbank didn't sit by. They created a multi-billion-dollar US dollar credit program to make sure that those countries could afford the crucial imports and keep trade moving smoothly during these tough times. Now, to tell you how they got there, please welcome Mr. Kwabena Ayirebi, who is the Managing Director of Banking Operations.
COVID-19, what an extraordinary education for us all on how to look after our continent. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kwabena Ayirebi. I've only been in Afreximbank a mere 8 years, but wow, what an extraordinary journey that has been. And that's why it's such a real honor to have this opportunity to share with you a snippet of that journey that we've had the honor to take with Professor Oramah. And just in case you may not have noticed, what my colleagues, both previous and current, have been taking you through is how we as Team Afreximbank are developed. It is an immersive, historic, economic, political, and business education, not drawn from theoretical philosophy, but through a lived experience of how we ensure that our continent and our people remain resilient and prosper. In this segment, my colleagues, Robert and Gwen, have taken you through how we respond to the various crises, most not of our making, but which continue to threaten to derail the development trajectory of our continent. I'll round up this segment by talking you through how, guided by Professor Oramah, we responded to the ongoing Ukraine crisis. Russia and Ukraine in 2021 contributed about 44% of Africa's wheat imports. In 2022, the Ukraine crisis disrupted over 30 million tons of grain, triggering food shortages and price surges across the continent. Global oil market shocks did not help, drove up fuel costs, compounding inflation through higher transport and production expenses. Food, as most of us will know, accounts for a significant portion of the African household expenditure, 42% in normal circumstances, 60% in conflict-afflicted areas. The crisis also disrupted trade routes and reduced foreign investment, weakening African economies already reeling from COVID-19. Governments faced shrinking revenues and rising debts due to lower trade and tax income. Unlike Europe, which had the ability to spend $640 billion through subsidies and price controls, African countries lacked that fiscal space to shield our populations from these shocks. Yet again, without prompt and impactful intervention, Africa's fragile recovery and development gains risked being severely reversed. Let me pause now and paint a picture for you. So the news hits. Executives, a few senior managers gather in Professor Oramah's office. It's a table, holds maybe about 8 people. He sits at the end. Then he leans forward and he says, look, let me tell you what is going to happen. And that is when the prophecy starts, and that is when we then start moving as a team to bring solutions. And in this case, that triggered our strategy and product development function to put together the framework, quickly syndicated amongst all the core functions. We then end up with a product paper, which in a matter of a couple of weeks is approved by the board. That is our Ukraine Crisis Adjustment Trade Financing Program for Africa, or UCAPFA, as we call it. Now, that's the nice part. What that misses out is the fact that when Professor Oramah asked, how long will this take? The response was 3 weeks. He said, no. Bring your teams. Let us sit down. We will share the work. Each person will write a section and we'll turn it around. And as the head of strategy told me, how do I take my work to my boss to do? So we don't have a choice. We then have to turn it around in 3 days. And that's the typical life it has been for these past 8 years. So, up till June this year, under UCAPFA, we have disbursed 34.7 billion of financing. Of this, 32% has been in the form of the letters of credit and guarantees that are required to secure access to the critical supplies that the continent needs. And 68% in the form of straight finance loans have provided the needed physical breathing space for our country to adapt. 6% of the intervention has been directed at pure intra-African trade, 41% to extra-African trade, and 50% is where we feel it's either intra-African or extra-African. The impact of this intervention has been nothing short of extraordinary. 5.8% cumulative contribution to Africa's total trade and 6.4% cumulative contribution to intra-African trade. We estimate that each dollar of disbursements under UCAPFA contributes about $2.5 billion to Africa's total trade and $2 billion to intra-African trade. The program continues to impact the real sector and the livelihoods of our people. We provided trade finance lines to 48 financial intermediaries in 23 countries across Africa. Out of this, 10% is of those funding, which is about $10.8 billion, we believe was directly impacting about 3,300 African SMEs. And even more relevant is the fact that we've estimated that we've touched about 64% of the continent's population in the 29 African countries, including 18 LDCs that this program impacted. Your Excellencies, so what were the key lessons for us as students of Professor Oramah? What did we take away? First, it is only with a deep knowledge of the history, the economies, and the interlinkages of our continent with the rest of the world that we can appreciate and then anticipate the impact of seemingly unconnected events on our people. Second, we must focus on the long-term structural transformation of our continent that is needed for resilience. We will intervene when needed, but the perennial vulnerability of our continent must be mitigated. We must focus on energy self-sufficiency, food self-sufficiency, vaccine independence. These are the things that will stand us in good stead as things progress. And last but not the least, you need to know how to come up with a catchy name. UCAPFA, COTRALF, PATIMFA, that is all part of the lessons that we draw every day. So, tomorrow, Dr. Elombi, we begin our PhD with you. But today, we graduate from our MBA under the tutelage of Professor Benedict Oramah. Professor, we are ready to continue your mission, Africa. And for the invaluable lessons we learn at your feet, We, your students, will be forever grateful as we look at the extraordinary promise that lies ahead. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Now, they say health is wealth, and for Africa, it's never been more important to build resilience into our healthcare systems through investment, through innovation, through infrastructure. And now your first speaker on this is a board member of FEDA, the Fund for Export Development in Africa. Please welcome Mr. Mazi Okonkwo. President.
Thank you. Let me stand on the established protocols. Mine is a simple task, is to tell the story of how Contour product started, construction tourism product of Afreximbank. It was about, It was about 2026, 2027, when I had just been appointed acting managing director of Shelter Afrique. And we were thinking of what to do with ourselves and how to work together with Afreximbank. Our first port of call was to Afreximbank and to my brother, Dr. Oramah, as he was then known, plead for help. And we came with two requests. One, to give us a line and help us to start trade financing building materials. Second, to help us access money to finance our construction and development project. The first one was quite easy for Afreximbank to grant. They just told us, if you are ready, we can help you set up that trade finance there, specifically for building materials. The second one, he basically told us that we needed to align our mandate to the Afreximbank mandate. A few years earlier, I had assisted Afreximbank to set up the process for selecting the architect for developing their headquarters building. And throughout the process, together with President Eduardo and Oramah, they interrogated the whole process of construction, and I could see in them the fear they had about the construction industry. But at the end of the day, they managed to appoint a team of architects, and they did a very beautiful headquarters building. We now wanted to build upon that experience that was quite enriching for them and for us. Then the construction aspect of it. I remember in the discussion, Dr. Oramah said that they were thinking of developing a program for the tourism industry in Africa, and that Shelter Afrique then could be a good partner if we could come up with a product. We went back and wrote up something, presented it to Dr. Oramah. He interrogated it, questioned us, and came up with something that he now called construction tourism product. Quite different, quite unique, quite comprehensive. And the idea then was for Shelter Afrique to anchor this product. Somewhere along the line, Shelter Afrique was not forthcoming, but that did not deter Dr. Oramah Afreximbank from continuing with this product. What happened now was that it got extended to all African institutions and tourism asset and services developers to provide construction finance with the guarantee of Afreximbank to underwrite the business and the takeout finance risk. It became a platform for sharing risk, knowing the strength of each institution and their capability and what they're able to assume. One thing that came up in the discussions that we had with them was the willingness of an individual and the institution to assist a sister African organization, Shelter Afrique being one of the great Babacar Njaya's babies. And that Pan-Africanism and the collaboration was very, very evident in the discussions we had. In the process, a plain vanilla product we had submitted to Afreximbank became Contour, a very sophisticated, properly named and marketed product that has today become one of the major products of the bank. What are the lessons we learned out of this relationship? I mentioned that Contour was a cry for help to Afreximbank, to a brother and a friend. It was a casual discussion, not knowing that it was quite serious for Dr. Oramah. He took it up, helped us, saw the potential, especially in the development of Africa and in furtherance of the trade finance mantra and mandate of the bank. It became an innovative product that underlines the uniqueness and the ability of Professor Oramah to think and create. When he started with Shelter Afrique, even though he started with Shelter Afrique, it became a global and African product. It becomes a mechanism for sharing and managing risk, and it exemplifies Professor Oramah's can-do spirit. Everything has a solution. Every problem has a solution. If only we can think together and be passionate about the problem we want to resolve. Today, I understand that Contour has committed over 600 million and delivered 11 world-class hotel and tourism projects, delivering about 2,400 keys in 8 countries, including Grenada. I also understand that 10 deals amounting to about 1.3 billion are in the pipeline and waiting to be funded. Contour has become a very impactful product and has helped participating institutions to gain tremendous experience in tourism project financing and risk mitigation. It has also enabled institutions that had never funded tourism products before to accept that challenge, given the support of the bank. I take this opportunity to thank Professor Oramah for his enduring belief in the development of Africa and for expanding the scope and reach of trade finance and development finance in Africa. As far as Oramah is concerned, Professor Oramah is concerned, the definition of trade can be extended to different sectors, provided it leads to development of Africa, it stems the outflow of forex, it encourages the retention of jobs in Africa. And for this, we are very grateful. And also, I thank the incoming president, Dr. Elombi, who will always give the legal meaning and framework to some of these products. It was also this case with Contour. Thank you very much for being there when we needed you and for the impactful development and results that you have achieved. I urge all of us to continue to support the bank and the new management to ensure that new products are developed and the existing ones supported and sustained. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mazi Okonkwo. We're going to stay on health now. In June, I had the honor of emceeing the launch of a facility that was truly out of this world. You know, we've been talking about how Prof says that it can be done. Well, it was done, and the proof was really there. I stood in this incredible hospital, incredible medical facility, and I saw machines that I've never seen before. They looked like they were out of the future. It was quite spellbinding. I'm talking about the African Medical Center for Excellence, or AMCE in Abuja, launched in June, and it's the brainchild of Professor Oramah. This facility offers, I'm telling you, world-class services in treatments of cancer and other illnesses that affect the blood and affect the heart. It's going to serve also as a hub, an African hub, not just for Nigeria, but for the whole of Africa, for medical research and medical training. The technology there, I'd never seen anywhere else in West Africa. It was definitely the best in the West. Don't take my word for it. Let's hear from a lady who nursed this project into existence. A warm round of applause for the Managing Director of Export Development of Afreximbank, Ms. Oluronti Doherty.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to stand on existing protocols. Today, we celebrate an extraordinary leader, a visionary whose ideas, courage, and devotion to Africa's progress have inspired us all at Afreximbank and has inspired a generation of Africans. A true son of Africa, whose life's work continues to redefine what is possible for our continent. Today, I am very privileged and indeed honored to speak to some of the visionary works that Professor Oramah has led us to undertake as a bank. And so I will be speaking to some of the transformational challenges that we saw. We know that since independence, most African countries have faced a lot of structural challenges. Some of these challenges include underfunded healthcare, infrastructure deficits, and dependence on imports, and low agricultural productivity. For Professor Oramah, every challenge presents an opportunity. And because of this, he championed a transformational agenda that was built on innovative financing instruments, strategic investments in people, technology, and infrastructure. This vision is embodied in Afreximbank's industrialization and export development strategic pillar, its products, its programs, and its initiatives. I'll be sharing with you some of the interventions we've deployed in Afreximbank under Professor Oramah's leadership in the healthcare and industrial space. In the healthcare interventions, one of the innovative products President Oramah came up with, led us to develop, is the Construction and Medical Tourism Linked Relief Facility, CONMED, through which we were able to support the development of world-class medical facilities and infrastructure across the continent. Another of this initiative is the African Medical Center of Excellence, through which we were able to prove that Africans can develop world-class facilities when we put our hearts to it. Also, the Africa Life Sciences Foundations. But apart from the healthcare interventions, we also have the industrial interventions. And some of these include the Africa Quality Assurance Centers that enable us to test and inspect and certify goods produced in Africa for export markets. Industrial parks and special economic zones that boost and spur manufacturing on the continent and create jobs for our teeming population. And not leaving behind to support to the SMEs. But what I want to take us through is, where did this vision come from? If you look at the chart I'm showing you today, it shows the number of hospital beds per person in so many regions. But if you look at something that is consistent, you'll see that African countries are worse off. For example, In Senegal, you have 7.3 beds to 10,000 people. In Nigeria, it's even far worse. 5 beds to 10,000 people. A challenge that is really significant. Then let's talk of health workers. Health workers, 1,000 persons, 1,000 health workers per person. You have in Nigeria 0.2 health workers to 1,000 persons, not even up to 1, meaning that the people who are working in Africa trying to solve the health challenges of the continent are overworked. We don't have people. So what are the challenges we saw? Severe shortage of healthcare workers, underfunded, under-equipped hospitals, outbound medical tourism, costing the continent an estimate of $7 billion per annum. Professor Oramah, thinking through this and taking on board some of his own personal challenges, his personal illness he had gone through, envisioned the Africa Medical Center of Excellence, a bold initiative developed in collaboration with King's College Hospital, London, to build world-class quaternary healthcare facilities across Africa. And we started with a proof of concept, a pilot project in Abuja, Nigeria. I'm glad to tell you today that that vision has become a reality. The AMC Abuja. It was successfully commissioned on the 5th of June, 2025. A specialty hospital offering advanced care in oncology, cardiology, hematology, general medicine, equipped with world-class facilities, including PET scan, 3 Tesla MRI, and 18 MEV cyclotron, a SPECT CT, 3 cath labs, 5 operating theaters, and a first-of-its-kind stem cell lab on African continent. Now, what does this show you? You've had a lot of the speakers come here today to tell you, if it's impossible, that is when Professor Oramah says we can do it. What began as Professor Oramah's vision, what everybody told us, you guys are a bunch of dreamers, forget it, is now a living testimony to Africa's capacity to deliver world-class healthcare. You may be wondering, what is she talking about? What is this world-class healthcare and what is the impact? How does it benefit Africa? How do we, get anything out of this? 500 beds, world-class facility, 3,000 jobs. 3,000 jobs provided, both pre-construction, construction, and post-construction. 350,000 patients to be seen in the first 5 years. Attraction of $750 million worth of investment into the healthcare sector, never before seen in Africa. A round of applause for Prof. Now, what do we have at the moment in this facility? We have a staff strength of 400 people. 400 people from diverse regions of the world. You know what we've been able to do? We've turned around brain drain to what? Brain gain. Africa has started gaining back its brains. We have staff from Nigeria, from Egypt, from Kenya, from Burkina Faso, Malawi, Cameroon, South Africa, all at the AMC Abuja. We have attracted top-tiered professionals, the best in their fields. Even people knighted by the Queen have come back to work for us. So that is the power of vision. But apart from this, I'm not going to condense President Oramah's intervention into one single project. President Oramah is a visionary leader that whenever there are challenges, he comes up with visionary responses. I've mentioned the construction and medical tourism relay facility. With that product, he has been able to support the financing of hospitals and medical facilities in Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Gambia, Nigeria, Uganda, transforming the healthcare space. Single-handedly, one of the first DFIs to take a keen interest in health and move towards that. But that's not enough. They didn't stop there. He didn't make us stop there. He pushed us to move further. Professor Oramah championed the creation of the Africa Life Sciences Foundation, a Pan-African initiative that is dedicated to advancing research in diseases that disproportionately affect people of African descent. For so long, diseases like sickle cell anemia have been left untreated just because it's a disease that affects us and we are not the people that matter in terms of research across the world. But President Oramah, with the bank's executives, took a keen interest to establish the Africa Life Sciences Foundation to ensure we reverse this, to ensure that the cure for sickle cell anemia will never be a pipe dream again. In March 2025, the board of the bank established the Africa Life Sciences Foundation and seeded it with $75 million to ensure research in diseases that affect you and I does not go unattended to. Now, I want to go just beyond health because President Oramah is also an advocate for industrialization. And it would be remiss of me if I do not talk to what he has done in that space also. Africa's industrialization has always had a gloomy narrative. Manufacturing contributing less than 12% of GDP compared to average of 22% globally. Over 70% of exports were unprocessed and taken out of the continent raw as commodities. But President Oramah, looking at this challenge, also came up with so many innovative solutions. One of them is the Africa Quality Assurance Center. Another is the Industrial Parks and Export Processing Zones Initiative, and also the Project Preparation Financing Facility. But let me talk to you about the Africa Quality Assurance Center. You know when they say President Oramah brings things out of nothing, that when you think you know him, you now realize you have not even understood the breadth of what he's capable of. A chance encounter with an African entrepreneur who was operating a facility in the US, a food product store, and him complaining that there was challenge in getting food products from the continent to the US because the food products don't meet the quality standards, led to the creation of the Africa Quality Assurance Center. And we went into implementing this. And in 2022, we were able to open the first Africa Quality Assurance Center in Ogun State, Nigeria, all thanks to Professor Oramah's vision. We are now developing Africa Quality Assurance Centers in Gabon, in Chad, in Benin, and all across the continent, with the bank seeding a total of $100 million to ensure that products we produce can connect to global markets. I would also like to talk about the Africa Project Preparation Facility, another visionary intervention. With Africa Project Preparation Facility, over 20 million worth of funds have been disbursed to finance projects and to make them bankable. And this has unlocked 11.5 billion investments into projects produced or promoted by African entrepreneurs. This is a very significant achievement, and projects that would otherwise have been lying down, unmoved, undone, have seen the light of day because of this visionary leader. Thank you, Professor Oramah. Now, looking at all the projects we financed, railways, ports, refineries, logistics hub, these are all due to your vision. You never accept defeat, and you have the can-do attitude. Recurring themes in Professor Oramah's leadership. Professor Oramah believes in African-led solutions. He challenges the status quo. His leadership has redefined the role of what development finance should be. You can see initiatives that are groundbreaking. But beyond his vision, he turns bold concepts into lasting impact through structured and results-driven approach. And if you want to talk about leadership, Professor Oramah leads from the front. He is active in all his initiatives. He ensures he brings critical stakeholders on board. He would bring in people who are able to help do things from wherever they are. He is a leader who does not delegate vision. Professor Oramah demonstrates it. Professor Oramah's legacy is defined by institution building that are lasting. Prof, under your leadership, you've done great things. You've established platforms that will last the test of time. You've built things that will progress beyond your tenure. We can only hope, and we pray, and we will strive to ensure that we live and build on your legacy. Prof, you are a rare gem. You are 1 in a trillion. You are God's gift to our dear continent. You are a son in whom Mother Africa is extremely proud. Do I need to say more? Is there more to say? Prof, you are a leader. You're a visionary. You're a true Pan-African patriot. Thank you, Prof. And I want to take you through on the next video for you to see Professor Oramah's vision as it has become a reality. I want you to walk with me through the corridors of the Africa Medical Center of Excellence, Abuja. Thank you.
We too deserve to thrive, to age in peace, to fight disease with dignity and win. This is how we stay. This is how we stand. Afrexim has laid a foundation of faith through the right leadership, because if a leader doesn't act, the world cannot follow. Vision without movement is just a dream, but when a leader sees and dares to move, he opens the road for others to walk. And if Africa must rise, it must be by the hands and the will of Africans. This is 3,000 jobs and rising. This is 350,000 patients with names. This is a mother no longer forced to beg borders for her child's tomorrow. This is how we break the cycle, how we bring our children home. No more fathers dying alone in foreign beds. No more mothers learning last breaths through WhatsApp calls. No more excellence in exile. This is a continent reclaiming its right to care. The caregivers have come home. The cure has come home. The confidence has come home. This is a defiance of dependency. This is what transformation feels like. A continent refusing to bleed brilliance, choosing instead to build cathedrals of care. And AMCE is the altar where sickle cells will be seen, studied, solved, and cancer will be a question we are unafraid to answer. This is what self-reliance sounds like. The hum of the cyclotron, the dignity of doctors choosing to stay. AMCE is rebellion against the notion that Africa must go out to get better. No. The healing has come home. This is the Africa they told us to wait for. But let the world know, we are not waiting anymore. Africa is returning to herself. Africa is not surviving, she is healing, thriving, stuttering her wounds with still. She is innovating, she is becoming, and this time, she is doing it at home.
The African Medical Center of Excellence. Now, it's not just in health where we have an infrastructure gap. It runs across many industries, many countries. But Afreximbank is not standing still. Afreximbank is empowering engineering and construction companies across Africa. And here to tell us how they're doing it and what they've achieved, please welcome the Director of Trade, Investment and Corporate Finance at Afreximbank, Mr. Ayman Al-Zogbi.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me, I'd like to use the mic and walk around the stage if it's possible. I know that everybody is tired, but I promise you in less than 10 minutes, I'll be doing my presentation. My name is Ayman Al-Zogbi, and I handle intra-African trade, investment, and corporate finance. Today, I'll be talking to you about our EPC initiative, which is the Engineer, Procure, and Construct initiative, under which Afreximbank is trying to support African construction companies to win and execute infrastructure projects across Africa. But before I bore you further with all the facts and numbers, let me tell you a very short story. We were once working with an African construction company to help them win and execute a project in another African country. And all of a sudden, the head of state of that country called President Oramah and told them, look, we seem to have a better offer from a European construction company, and we would like Afreximbank to direct the financing to that company. And President Oramah said, no, our financing is exclusive to support our African indigenous construction companies. The head of state went on and said, but their offer is better, and your African construction company is very slow in responding. President Oramah said, still, our financing is exclusive to help our African indigenous construction companies. And that is how this African construction company won that project. It was an Egyptian company, by the way. But then we realized that there is a problem. And as much as there is a gap and a problem in the infrastructure in Africa, there is also a challenge inherent in our African construction companies that need to be dealt with. And this is how it all started. When we realized that challenge, those African construction companies need capacity, need market information, need financing, need training, need information, need capacity, need workshops, need everything to be able to win and execute infrastructure projects. And as usual, President Oramah had the vision that Afreximbank must step in and step up and do something about it, and that's how the EPC initiative came to life. It's an initiative that was launched by Afreximbank to help African construction companies win and execute contracts and be able to compete with international players across the continent and help bridge the infrastructure gap. We have two main pillars. Of course, the financing arm is one of them, by giving tailor-made, innovative financing solutions directly and indirectly, funded and unfunded, to the projects and the African EPCs to be able to do those projects, but also, and more importantly, by providing facilitation services. Through twinning services, we help those companies win contracts. We take them by hand to the African governments and the projects and give them the opportunity to bid for and show their experiences and capabilities. We do capacity building through training and helping them on how to win and bid for contracts across the continent. We give them market information. We give them the recent trends in the infrastructure space in Africa. And we have developed an EPC platform, which is a digital platform through which those African construction companies can have a direct access to opportunities being bid for across the continent. So, as Dr. Elombi said this morning, to put vision into execution, let me walk you through some of the achievements we've done so far under this initiative. So far, we were able to support African construction companies to do infrastructure projects in 16 African countries. And also, under the Global Africa, we went far and beyond into the Caribbean region, and we were able to do projects in 4 Caribbean countries: Grenada, St. Lucia, Barbados, and the Bahamas. And even beyond, we helped some of the Egyptian construction companies to export their construction services outside into the Gulf region, Singapore, and we're helping one of them now to penetrate the German market. In total, a number of 32 projects were able to be done and supported under this initiative so far in diversified sectors: ports, bridges, roads, power stations, you name it. So many diversified sectors across Africa. And we're able to help and support, through facilitation and financing, 21 African and Caribbean construction companies. In terms of financial figures, so far a total value of $15.6 billion worth of projects were supported under this initiative. A total value of $8 billion worth of financing and twinning services were deployed to those African construction companies. And Dr. Elombi, we have $3.6 billion of pipeline that is still to be done. In terms of capacity building, so far we're able to deploy 5 EPC workshops in which we have trained a lot of EPC contractors, working with my colleagues in Egypt, Nigeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. So as much as the numbers speak for themselves, the project stories behind them are far greater, and the developmental impact is far deeper than any chart that can ever depict. Let me give you some of those examples very briefly. In North Africa, for example, we worked with a number of construction companies. We helped some of them export their services outside of the continent. We helped some of them build the Rufiji Dam in Tanzania, which is arguably the largest intra-African project ever done on the continent so far. It was done solely by African capacities. And we helped Somajek of Morocco build a state-of-the-art marine jetty in Djibouti, which helped Djibouti to become a regional hub in the oil and gas trade in East Africa. Similarly, in other regions in West Africa, we've worked with a number of construction companies on a road network connecting from Côte d'Ivoire all the way to Mali. In South Africa, we worked with a company in Angola and helped them build a stadium in Côte d'Ivoire that allowed Côte d'Ivoire to host the Cup of Nations finals, and we supported another one to export their services beyond their homeland into Mozambique and Ghana. Similarly, in East Africa, we're trying to work with a company in Uganda to help build road networks in Tanzania and Kenya. And we've not forgotten our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean. We're also supporting 2 Caribbean construction companies to help them do roads, bridges connecting the islands, and climate-resilient infrastructure. Well, as I conclude, I would like also to, and always to conclude with a message. So my message here today is that we've all heard today and witnessed the Mansa Musa performance where everybody was shouting and wondering, where is the gold, where is the gold? Well, the gold is in our minds and in our hearts. And all those things are true examples of what Africans can do when they come together under one common cause. And it was none than Afreximbank that brought them together. And for that, we thank you, President Oramah. We thank you so much. Yes. We thank you for shaping Afreximbank into that catalyst and that enabler. We thank you for your vision. We thank you for your leadership. And more importantly, we thank you for empowering all of us to bring all those accomplishments to life. Those accomplishments will not only stand as part of your enduring legacy, they will also serve as the very foundation and benchmark for all that we aspire to achieve next. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you all for listening. God bless you all. Thank you.
And thank you, Ayman. You're absolutely right. The impact of Professor Oramah and Afreximbank is incredible. Take a look at the screens.
In 2015, Professor Oramah set out to turn Afreximbank into the engine room for a resilient Africa through trade. At the same time, the commodity slump echoed the shocks of the 1980s, and the determination to deal with the turmoil that had given rise to Afreximbank returned. Africa would handle the storm with its own hands and its own institutions again. Dealing with the 2015 and 2016 commodity shock head-on, Oramah rallied the response. He set the tone and direction for the future. From the COVID-19 disruption of 2020 and 2021 to the Ukraine-related fallout from 2022 to 2024, the bank moved with steady continental reach. It projected self-reliance and staying power when it mattered most. When liquidity tightened, Afreximbank scaled up. Through Cottralf, $10 billion helped countries meet trade obligations during the slump, keeping supply lines open and obligations met. In the pandemic years of 2020 and 2021, disbursements reached at least $26 billion. They bridged budgets, protected trade, and sustained investment in growth sectors across the continent. As the Ukraine war rattled food and fuel flows, the bank followed through again with $50 billion between 2022 and 2023 to support essential imports and finance trade and development programs. In moments of pressure, Africa now had a first point of call, its own crisis architecture. Cottralf for the commodity shock, Patimfa Navat during COVID-19, and UCAFPA in response to the Ukraine crisis. Beyond crisis response, the bank fueled intra-African trade, integration, and empowerment. Afreximbank became the principal financier and partner to the AFCFTA Secretariat, helping the single market move from aspiration to operation. PAPS, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, matured into a working ecosystem. It launched the PAPS African Currency Marketplace and PAPS Card, the first Pan-African card scheme. The AFCFTA Adjustment Fund backed a fair transition to tariff-free trade. The Africa Trade Gateway digitized opportunity, connecting exporters, importers, and financiers through PAPS, Mansa, ATEX, TradeLink, and ATG Connect. In parallel, the first 4 editions of the Intra-African Trade Fair drew over 180,000 visitors and 6,600 exhibitors. Together, they generated more than $158 billion in deals. On the ground, the bank stood behind Africa's largest industrial achievements. Support to the Dangote refinery totaled $5.5 billion, the world's largest single train facility. It pushed self-sufficiency and value addition in energy. Through Afreximbank's decade-long $2 billion funding relationship with Arise Integrated Industrial Platforms, special economic zones from Gabon and Benin to Togo turned raw inputs into finished goods, cotton into textiles, timber into furniture, harvests into consumer products, minerals into higher value outputs. These SEZ investments transformed local economies, creating jobs, reducing poverty, and restoring dignity. Afreximbank also released a $450 million global credit facility for SEZs in Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, Malawi, and beyond. It is expected to generate $5 billion in exports and 170,000 jobs. To put Made in Africa on more shelves, the Africa Trade and Distribution Company took shape. It aggregated, branded, and distributed African goods, reinforced by national export trading companies. Africa's orange economy received a dedicated runway. The Creative Africa Nexus, CANEX, accelerated creative industries with funding doubled to $2 billion. A planned $1 billion film fund through FEDA adds depth to that pipeline, backing talent, retaining intellectual property, and linking culture to industrialization. In Abuja, the $750 million 500-bed African Medical Center of Excellence is designed to stem the roughly $25 billion that leave the continent each year in medical tourism. Across value chains, African quality assurance centers are providing testing and certification. Collaboration with ARSO is advancing harmonized standards, making it easier for everyday goods to move across borders. Afreximbank as an institution also expanded in lockstep with its mission. Total assets and guarantees grew from under $6 billion in 2015 to over $43 billion by 2025. Revenues reached historic levels above $3.4 billion, with net income around $1 billion. Shareholders' funds rose from just over $1 billion to $7.5 billion, providing ballast when global finance looked away. Liquidity sources diversified too, including Panda and Samurai bonds. African resources climbed to roughly 30% of total liquidity, an international strategy to tap Africa's own savings for Africa's development. To meet specialized needs, Afreximbank evolved into a group with tailored mechanisms. FEDA began closing the continent's estimated $110 billion equity gap, investing in manufacturing, agribusiness, logistics, financial services, and digital infrastructure. Afrexinsure created a single entry point for specialty insurance. The Africa Project Preparation Fund focused on building bankable pipelines, most recently signing an agreement with the South African government expected to unlock $750 million in investment. And Afreximbank Africa Trade Centers established permanent hubs for dialogue, matchmaking, and deal-making, with new centers progressing from Barbados to Rwanda. The bridge to the diaspora also arose, following the AU's 2008 recognition of the diaspora as Africa's sixth region. The bank helped translate aspiration into action. Active in the Caribbean, a Caribbean office, and AACT in Bridgetown. The Global Africa Gateway in New York, knitting together over 2 billion people of African descent into a coherent economic network. At the first 4 actives, more than $6.3 billion worth of deals were signed and over 8,100 delegates welcomed. The idea was simple: align capital, skills, and markets across borders, and opportunity multiplies on both sides. Marcus Garvey once spoke of Africa's redemption arriving like a storm. The bank's answer is practical: build systems, pool resources, and set our own standards so shocks don't decide our future. Others don't decide our destiny. Under Professor Oramah's guidance, the legacy is clear: resilience, integration, and bold innovation, anchored in institutions that outlast any single crisis. When Africans fund, govern, and scale their own solutions, prosperity and dignity stop being promises and start reading like plans.
Now, how many of you were with us last month in Algeria for the Intra-Africa Trade Fair? Wasn't it incredible? How many of you, if you clap your hands if you were there? It's quite a remarkable platform, one of the platforms, the powerful platforms that have been created under the tenure of President Professor Oramah. And you know, when I was there, one of the things that really gets me is I look to my left and I see a Moroccan. I look to my right, I see a Nigerian. I look there, I see someone from Madagascar, someone from Ghana, all coming together and doing trade, not just talking, but doing trade with the ability to use the African Continental Free Trade Area, PAPS, the Africa Trade Gateway, and all these tools and platforms that make trade possible and break down borders. So it's an incredible platform. I call it, in fact, this is why I call Prof. I always call you the Pan-Africanist 2.0, because it was Pan-Africanism 2.0 in motion. Now, to tell us more about the IATF journey, please give a warm round of applause to the MD for Strategy and Product Development at Afreximbank, Dr. Gainmore Zanamwe.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I will just stand on existing protocols. I was told that this is actually a Nigerian invention, but the jury is still out to confirm that. So I think Mark has already started with some of the key initiatives that we have been implementing at Afreximbank. I'll just take you through some of the key impactful initiatives that Professor Oramah led in terms of conceptualizing and also execution. And I'll also probably, before I do that, try to take you to more or less the same time that we'll be having tomorrow. This is 2015 when Professor Oramah was basically inaugurated. And the very first thing that runs through his speech, if you actually look at his investiture, is his message about intra-African trade. He actually said, I quote, "I have searched for answers in my many years of strategy work at Afreximbank and come to the conclusion that the very low levels of intra-African trade holds back Africa's emergence as a significant and a sustainable global economic power." He went on to say that to address this challenge, we will make the promotion and facilitation of intra-African trade the cornerstone of our work. Remember 2015, that was the year when we had a number of crises. Remember 2015, this is when very few people were talking about intra-African trade. If they were to talk about intra-African trade, they'll be telling you about the obstacles to intra-African trade and how it cannot be done. Then intra-African trade was not fashionable, but Professor Oramah, being a visionary, said we need to focus on intra-African trade. And that was basically the birth of the intra-African trade strategy, which is basically based on three key pillars: create, connect, and deliver. I will not go into detail on those. But most importantly, he appointed the Executive Vice President, Kanayo Awani, to lead most of the initiatives. And with the support of Professor Oramah and EVP Kanayo, we implemented about 40 products and initiatives to focus on promoting and supporting intra-African trade. Professor Oramah realized that to deal with intra-African trade, you cannot just throw the finance, but you need to focus on other trade facilitation interventions. These are the ones that we've been focusing on. Mark has already covered the intra-African trade fair, but I don't know where, Professor, you were around 1963. You probably were a toddler when the AU was actually talking about the importance of intra-African trade. And when Professor came, he implemented the OAU decision about intra-African trade as though he was in the room when it was being discussed, because he led the conceptualization, he led the execution of the big event and the success that we achieved in Algeria. He also provided support in terms of ensuring that after the last edition we had in Algeria, IATF should also stand as a an entity to avoid what happened in the past. And these are the achievements that we've actually attained with Professor Oramah's leadership. I will not go through them, but another important initiative is the collaborative transit guarantee scheme that he also helped us to implement, which will ensure that with a single transit bond, you can move goods from Cape Town to Cairo. And he also helped us to conceptualize and implement the 10 billion AFCFTA adjustment fund, which actually made the AFCFTA a reality. That did not also stop there. He also helped us to implement the African Continental Trading Company. I will not focus much on it, but it's a key tool that the bank is going to use to aggregate products that are going to be produced in various African countries and take them to the market and control the supply chains. Because if we don't control the supply chains, we will not be able to add value to our resources. He also supported us to implement the automotive strategy to ensure that we don't just continue importing the pre-loved vehicles from outside the continent, but we can actually manufacture our own vehicles on the African continent using the AFCFTA. He also went to support a number of initiatives, including the harmonization of standards. To date, we've harmonized close to 700 standards that will facilitate the movement of goods in the continent. He helped us to conceptualize the border markets initiatives to ensure that we remove the barriers to allow goods to move throughout the borders, as well as the buyers program that is going to reorient buyers to buy from Africa rather than buying things from outside the continent, when those goods can be found here in Egypt or in South Africa or in Algeria where we were. And he also is a visionary and a thought leader. He conceptualized the Africa Direct Investment Initiative, which helps us to focus on using our resources to address the African challenges. And in conclusion, I want to say, Professor Oramah, thank you for your vision on intra-African trade. When he took the initiative on intra-African trade, we managed to increase intra-African trade from around 3% of the bank's portfolio of intra-African trade share to now almost 34%, which is a big feat that was achieved under Professor Oramah. But he has always been reminding us that don't relax, because there are so many people who are not happy with some of the interventionist things that we are doing. He reminded, and I quote his words, "We are now engaged in a struggle, one fought with ideas, investments, industrialization, and not guns." Professor Oramah, we are ready with the generals in my team under the intra-African trade, led by EVP Kanayo, and also the incoming president, Dr. Elombi. We are ready not only to defend your legacy, but to work with Dr. Elombi to take it far and wide. Thank you very much, sir. You assisted the continent.
Thank you, gain more. I always gain more when I hear you. Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, those were a lot of speakers, granted, but listen, Afreximbank has done a lot in the last 10 years. It's hard to pack it in to one day even. But you know, you have loyally stayed to hear all of those, so I think you deserve a break. Lunch, shall we have lunch? It's only going to be 45 minutes, so please be back here at 3:45. Before you go, let me tell you where it is. If you have a silver pin, lunch is in the Charisma Ballroom. Charisma Ballroom, right here in this building. So if you go out, the ushers will show you the Charisma Ballroom if you have a silver pin. For our VIPs who have gold pins, it's in the Chantel Ballroom. And that is in a building very close It's in the Chantel Ballroom, and that is in a building very close. It's in the Chantel Ballroom, and that is in a building very close. It's in the Chantel Ballroom, and that is in a building very close. It's in the Chantel Ballroom, and that is in a building very close.